Greetings, students. Today we are talking about ethics. I want to talk about three main things. First, I want to talk about the place that ethics has within the discipline of public speaking and how we got here. I also want to talk about the importance of oral source citations, and we'll talk about how they're related to ethics within public speaking. And then I want to close by talking about the differences between free speech and ethical speech, as well as some similarities. So first of all, ethics in general as it relates to public speaking. Where do we get our ethics? Where do our ethics come from? That is a very difficult question to answer, tons of different approaches to it. I usually think of ethics and values as being similar, and when I start thinking about values instead of ethics, it becomes a little bit easier for me to think about. Because when I ask the question, where do my values come from, it's clear that my values come from the groups of which I am a part. So, I mean, we talk about family values all the time. In the media, people talk about national values. We know that things that we value in one country may differ from the way those same things are valued in a different country. Talk about religious values, and on and on and on. We can see that our values are tied to the groups of which we are a part, and those groups have kind of different codes of conduct, and that's where I think the word ethics comes into play. If we focus in specifically on the professions, we will note that the different professions have different codes of conduct that have developed according to the demands of their environments and their jobs. For example, in the medical world, we have physicians taking the Hippocratic Oath as far as not doing any harm to their patients, and in several other clauses as well in the Hippocratic Oath. But we don't see like reporters and journalists taking the Hippocratic Oath, for example, because it develops specifically with reference to medicine. In the journalistic field, we have other things that we're concerned about, like accuracy of sources and libel laws and things like that. So we can see that every discipline and every occupation is a little different. Everyone is concerned. Ethics are always concerned about what's right, and how to do what's right, and how to best serve others. But because those jobs involve people doing and accomplishing and serving in different ways, the codes of conduct usually emphasize different things. The reason I talk about all that is to raise this question. What is the code of conduct within the discipline of public speaking? Because all of us in this class should be concerned with that particular question, because we're all part of the community of public speakers and students of public speaking in the class. And over the years, a code of conduct has developed for public speakers. Things that are important within the speech community, within the communication discipline, that we particularly care about, that maybe other occupations don't need to emphasize as much. So the question then becomes, well, what is the public speaking code of conduct? The textbook outlines some items in there. It talks about some things that I think are shared between all disciplines and endeavors. Things like it's necessary to be honest, clearly. It's important to be sensitive and tolerant to differences. This is particularly important to us in the public speaking world because our audiences are diverse. Not everyone shares our lived experiences, and we need to be sensitive to that if we hope to connect with our audiences, which we do, because that is the defining characteristic of a successful speech. We also have a moral or an ethical obligation to have sound reasoning and use evidence that we have double-checked and triple-checked to make sure that the studies we're citing are accurate and credible, and not just some random thing we found on the internet or on Facebook that has ethical implications, because what we say our audience will often believe. Just like what we see on Facebook, we'll often uncritically believe just because somebody said it. When you are a speaker and you have all eyes on you, you have a lot of power, because whatever you say is going to go into the speaker's mind one way or the other. And like they say in Spider-Man, Uncle Ben says, with great power comes great responsibility. I said that I wanted to talk about oral source citations at the beginning of this talk, and what I mean there is when you are using a source, you must tell the audience where that information came from. So an oral source citation means you are saying out loud where the information came from. This is important because we have an ethical obligation to say where all the information came from. If someone else worked hard to produce a study or to research and come up with a statistic, they deserve recognition for the work that they did to put that information together. So if we take it and put it into our speeches without citing them properly, we're basically stealing their intellectual property. We're stealing their work, and that violates our code of ethics. So it's paramount that we cite every single source that we use, unless it's something like total common knowledge. So a good oral source citation has several aspects. Basically, the rule of thumb when you are trying to cite a source that you're using is you must give the audience enough information so that they can evaluate it for themselves. They're going to be asking themselves, is this a credible piece of information, or is this just some random thing this speaker happened upon on Facebook or on social media? They need all the information as far as who the author was. They need to know what year it was published. They need to know what organization that author is attached to. They need to know the publication it was in, whether it was in a book, whether it was on a blog, on a website, whether it was news, or so on. Whatever information you think is relevant to the source, the audience needs to know all of that. We don't want to hide anything from the audience. These are really important because your speeches are going to require a whole bunch of sources depending on the particular assignment you're working on, because I'm not really grading on whether you can articulate your opinion or not, or I'm not grading on whether your opinion is right or wrong as far as these speeches go, because who am I to assess those things? What I'm grading on is, are you citing your sources accurately? Are you picking good sources? Are you fulfilling your ethical obligation to avoid plagiarizing and giving credit where credit is due? So you'll see some information in the text on how to put a good oral source citation together, just to make sure the audience has all the information they need. You're also going to want to cite sources in APA style in the written outline that you provide for me as well, and you'll see that is modeled for you in the sample outline that I have provided. Finally, a couple of words on free speech versus ethical speech. I think the text has a really good explanation of these things, but it is very important to note the particular situation we're in the United States, because it differs from some other countries. The United States has free speech because that is a right we have reserved for ourselves in the Constitution of the United States. But I think other people in other countries would maybe enter into some debate as to whether that's a universal human right or not. Whether it is or not, other countries don't think about free speech in the same way we do. So if someone ever asks you what is free speech, the response to that has to have something to do with the Bill of Rights and the Constitution of the United States. That's where free speech comes from. We are protected to say what we want without fear of being imprisoned for doing so. And we have taken full advantage of that right in the United States. Some would say it's led to a breakdown of civility. People hurl mud at each other, call each other names with total impunity. We've lost any sense of respect for people who are different from us or people who disagree with us, some would say. But nevertheless, free speech is very important to our way of life, to our culture. So that's free speech, but what is ethical speech? If you can say anything at all, how do you know what's right and wrong? How do you know what you ought to say and what you ought not to say? And that is when you refer to the code of conduct of the public speaker. I always refer to it jokingly as the Jedi way. Something is either the Jedi way or not the Jedi way. And if you're not familiar with Star Wars, that reference is lost on you. And stop watching this and start watching Star Wars instead. But the Jedi have a code of conduct. The public speakers have a code of conduct as well. We have a responsibility. We have to hold ourselves to that responsibility to do what is right, to to never call each other names, to never belittle others as we seek to articulate our own points of view. Yeah, there's nothing in legislation of free speech that's necessarily going to do that, but it's our responsibility. It is our responsibility to hold ourselves to a higher standard. Okay, so far we've talked about the place of ethics within public speaking, a couple of guidelines as far as the speaker's code of conduct, and then finally a couple of just thoughts on the difference between free speech and ethical speech. I hope to see you again next time. Until then, happy speaking.